This podcast is a project of the Medina Focus, with the goal of providing space for collaboration and community among practitioners to the Muslim diaspora in North America. As people around the world have immigrated to the West, many Christians have realized that they live and work in the midst of the nations, and they often feel alone and unprepared to communicate cross-culturally. If you're looking for conversation and community surrounding issues of loving Muslim friends in Jesus' name, we welcome you into the conversation.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Brian.
And I'm Nate.
And today we've got an interesting show for you where we talk about size of organizations, newness of organizations as it relates to being nimble. And I'm reminded there's this movie I watched as a kid. It had Gene Hackman in it. It was called Enemy of the State. It's 1998. Goes way back. My kids. To me, that's still recent. But my kids are like, "Oh, it's such an old movie." And there's this one scene where they're trying to find somebody, and the Gene Hackman character talks about. He says, in guerrilla warfare, you try to use your weakness as strengths. And his opposite character goes, such as, and he says, well, if they're big and you're small, then you're mobile and they're slow. And so I think it's important that we recognize that every size and kind of organization, kind of like members of the body, has their role. But, my eye is certainly not a working implement, though it's very useful in the process of working. It keeps me from losing the finger in the shop. But I have to have my hand to grip it, and I have to have my arm to move the hand and to push the saw. And so, at the same time, every kind of organization has their advantages and disadvantages. And so our two guests today are two gentlemen who have both started their own organization. And so it's relatively new, young organizations that are on the less established side. And so they're going to share with us about the advantages and disadvantages that they face and how that is working out for them, and some of the new places that they're going, the new projects they're able to do, and the new people that they're able to mobilize. And so we have Matt joining us today. He's married to Julie, and they have 4 kids. He lived in Western China, and he also lived in Uganda, and he's the founder of Forefront. He founded this to train people on the field, and they changed their focus to the U.S.-based Unreached in around 2014, and so they kind of made a shift there. And he helps lead the Muslim-focused team of full-time workers in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We also have Bobby, who's the president of GoTEN, which stands for Go to Every Nation. Bobby and his wife Angie founded GoTEN while they were serving on the mission field among an unreached people group in South Asia. And since its beginning, GoTEN has been focused on introducing Jesus to people that have little or no access to them. And they have missionaries in 4 countries. One of those countries is the United States. So like Matt with Forefront, they also have a diaspora focus here. Bobby and Angie live in Phoenix, Arizona, where they lead a staff of 20 missionaries who are ministering to unreached refugees in Texas, Colorado, and Arizona. They desire to see the church mobilize locally and refugees return as missionaries among their own people. Hey, Matt and Bobby, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's good to be here.
We're excited to hear about your nimble agencies and how those work, what they're called even. So why don't each of you tell us a little bit about the organization that you're representing today, like the mission and vision stuff and the names and where you're located and stuff like that. Bobby, why don't we start with you?
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I represent GoTEN, which is an acronym that stands for Go to Every Nation. And our focus from the beginning has been on unreached people with little to no access to the gospel. And so, yeah, our vision started by just mobilizing and sending, and then phase 2 of that was training and equipping people before we sent them to the unreached. And so we thought the best place to do that would be among internationals in the United States. And through that process, we discovered that refugees still live in community. So there were apartment complexes in various cities where refugees were living. You could go into these apartments and it smells like Asia. It looks like Africa, and it was a great place to plant a missionary to be trained before we sent them out. And so that was phase 2, is that we would train, equip, and then send them. And then phase 3 was that we would actually have an impact on refugees here that we didn't. I guess we just saw them in the sandbox in the beginning, and now they become better missionaries than the Western people we were trying to send. So that's phase 3, is actually sending refugees back to their home people, in after they've gone through our training right here. So there's a little bit of GoTEN, is that we're laser focused on unreached people. And we've recognized that the unreached have moved to the United States. And so they are not just a people to reach, but they're a missionary sending force as well.
Yeah, that's great. So in a lot of really similar ways to what Bobby has said there, so we started Forefront, and actually our goal originally was to train people on the field. So what we saw young adults who were moving overseas who did not have any training. And so essentially what we said is we're gonna try to train these people on the field who are going anyways without training. Now that kind of took a couple of different iterations and looked different ways, and then things progressed and altered organizationally for us. We ended up with people back in America, and in really similar ways to what Bobby has shared, realized, man, God is bringing the nations in a different way to the U.S., especially from unreached places. And these people, while they're moving from Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq and Burma and Bhutan, they're moving here and they're still living in communities where they will remain largely unreached unless someone enters into that community. And so that's kind of where we began to shift our focus, was away from overseas and sending into stateside work among refugees, international students, other economic immigrants, people who are coming here from historically unreached places like Bobby shared to the U.S. and working to engage those individuals here. And so that looks kind of different. Sometimes that's people who are preparing to go, who their runway might be a little bit longer, but also one of the main things that we've done is train and equip churches to effectively engage those populations. And so in a city like Dallas, where I'm at, Dallas is increasingly diverse every single day. So there are more people moving to Dallas who are foreign born than were here the day before. And so unless the church is equipped to reach those individuals, they're becoming decreasingly effective. And so our goal is to walk alongside churches and to train and equip them to love well the people that are living near them. And many of those people are coming from unreached places. Many of them whose kids go to their kids' schools or soccer teams or neighbors or whatever it is. Those individuals are coming from places where they have historically had no access to the gospel, and God is giving us the ability to reach them in unprecedented ways. So that's a big piece of what we do. And then obviously we have people on staff who are full-time, focused on being in the community, building relationships, serving people, introducing them to Jesus. And so that's another big piece of what we do, is spending time in the harvest as well.
That's awesome. So yeah, Forefront experiences in Dallas. You're in other locations as well. I'd love to hear from both of you guys where you're located as well. That'd be great.
Yeah, so we have groups who are here in Dallas, Dallas-Fort Worth. We have a group in Northwest Arkansas. We have a group in Memphis, and then also in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And then we have a couple of other kind of non-staff groups that we work with that are kind of somewhat a part of what we're doing, but aren't actually on staff, who are in other places as well that we train and equip in those areas.
Yeah. Interestingly, we're actually in Dallas as well, and I've never actually met Matt before. today's first day I've seen his face and heard his voice, and so we definitely probably have some collaborating to do in that area, maybe actually in the same neighborhood, who knows. But we're in Dallas, and our Dallas site's about to expand into Fort Worth as well, and 3 different communities work in here in Phoenix, and 1 additional community working in Colorado Springs. So kind of like what Matt said, we're spread out a little bit too. Part of our growth has come from other mission organizations who traditionally have not seen North America as a mission field, and so there's I don't want to say very little, but traditionally most mission agencies focus on overseas, and so they didn't have quite the leadership or the platform or the opportunities here in America. And so some of those other mission agencies have seconded people to us.
So I have a lot of friends that get interested in ministry, and before long they're talking about starting their own 501c3. And oftentimes I've seen where their particular ministry could be, in partnership with a church or different organization. I had a friend that was doing mercy ministry, and a very small group of his friends that were helping him out with this. And I thought, man, if he starts this 501c3, that's like that's very entrepreneurial. It's like starting up a company, and he's not going to be doing any of the work that he wants to be doing that God's calling him to do. He's just going to be, filing papers and dealing with receipts and all this other stuff. And so I said, hey, why don't you find a church that'll help you, because they've already got all of that stuff involved. But for both of you, you share in common that you've both gone ahead and started your own organizations. And I imagine a lot of people listening to this podcast might be in similar shoes, going, man, do I find an organization to work with? Do I start my own? Do I put this under a church? What do I do? So what would be some of your advice to them about starting out on your own?
I'll go first here. So this is Bobby with GoTEN, and I would say, had I known more at the time when I started the organization, I probably wouldn't have. Had I known others were doing some similar things that I was doing, I probably wouldn't have started it. I started it because I didn't think anybody was doing what we were doing. And so, which is just kind of naive on my part, but so I think that relates to my advice. If there's somebody that's out there doing it and it fits with what God's called you to do, and the mission and the plan is the same, man, put your energy into that and join somebody. I mean, I would take somebody on my team today that has an entrepreneurial spirit who would like to join and pioneer new areas, because it takes that kind of thought and skill set. So I would much rather have somebody like that on my team that I could delegate a region or a program or something and let someone grow it if that's what they want to do. There's definitely room for that. I would agree in that there are a lot of tasks that have to be done as far as leading an organization that is going to take you out of the trenches. But I think that's one of the beauties of my job today, is that where I chose to live, my friends that I connect with, allows me to be right in the middle of ministry while I lead the organization. So if that's kind of a big, thing for you too, I think that there's space for that. I would just be cautious to just try to follow. I mean, there's things that we can learn from other organizations that have gone before us. We can learn best practices from them, but that doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. And so I choose to live where I live and engage in the ministry that I'm engaged in on a daily basis. And at the same time, I'm meeting with board members in churches and trying to raise funds and setting policies in place and dealing with HR issues. I get to do all of that kind of stuff. But at the same time, my neighbors are Muslims. So I get to do a little bit of both. But I guess at the end of the day, I would say, man, if there's somebody doing it already, go join it and make it better.
Yeah. I would agree. I mean, I think it's funny because obviously, you hear our two organizations kind of back to back, and you think, man, those are really similar. But I think in many ways, I would say the same thing to what Bobby just said there. Of like when we originally started Forefront, it felt like there weren't many people out there that were doing what we were doing, and so that was why we did. It can be hard. It can be hard, especially for those who are apostolically bent, who want to push into new space, which many people who would listen to this would be very likely. It can be hard for them to work within, like, have their own organization within a church sometimes, if the church doesn't understand what they're doing. But at the same time, if the church does get what they're doing, it can be a massive boost for them as well, because the church has the resources, the church has the people, the church has the money, the church has the ability to really push things forward, obviously. And so if you can find that good partner, it can mean a lot. I would also totally agree with what Bobby said. Where we have grown historically have been finding people who have been, like he said, who say, hey, I want to do this. It looks like you guys are doing it. Can I be a part of what you're doing? And that's how we've grown into different areas. So, finding people, for us who are focused on movements, focused on disciple making, focused on meeting needs, focused on reaching unreached people who are here in the U.S. I mean, those individuals, if those people are out there, obviously stepping into a place where you don't have to worry about the HR policies, you don't have to worry about the hiring procedures and all of those things. That's a win. I promise you, that's a win. And so that would be my advice as well. Would be, if you find somebody that you align with, that you can really get behind, that will allow you to run after what you want to run after at the same time. As long as it's in bounds, I would say, yeah, go do that for sure.
But at the same time, I would say the reason that Matt and I both, were engaged in starting organizations is because we saw gaps. And so I would encourage anybody out there that sees a gap to not be paralyzed by not knowing how it's going to work or how it's going to fund, or even if it's possible, but to step into those gaps. It's that same kind of apostolic gift or passion or whatever that moved people to move to the 1040 window or move outside of the 1040 window. It's that same kind of filling gaps that I think is needed. And so just had we not jumped into what we are, I don't know that we would have recognized that the Unreached were actually here. But now we've become champions of that among the churches that we work with, other organizations, mission agencies, and even people like who listen to this podcast. I want to make sure people know the Unreached are here. It doesn't negate what's going on overseas, but they're right here. So it was a gap. That's right.
That's good.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say too is there are ways as well to do it with a minimally viable product too. There are organizations and entities out there now that handle all of the 501c3 stuff, handle all of the compliance and those things, and just kind of bring you in underneath that. And honestly, if I were starting small, that's what I would do today. Is I would start there and try to build progressively from there and see if there is momentum and grow and learn. And like Bobby was saying about those gaps, that you're trying to actually fill those gaps without trying to go through all of the rigor of the process and filing the paperwork and all of those things, while some people can handle that for you.
One other thought that I would add to this 501c3 comment is GoTEN didn't really intend to do that, to start in this way. But we were based out of a church, and I had 3 advisory members. That's what they were, an advisory team who were leading us through this. But GoTEN outgrew the church, and so when we outgrew the church, it was time on more board members. Those 3 advisory team members became board members. We got 2 additional board members. And actually, it was the board members that did all the paperwork. So,
good.
Honestly, I'm not sure how hard it was to start a 501c3.
So your real advice is have board advisors who will do the paperwork for you. That's actually great advice right there.
Yeah, it's not,
Yeah.
I'm so
Yeah,
encouraged
that's
by.
accidentally what happened with us.
Well, you guys, as founders of sending agencies, that's a big deal. I think about, I don't remember that being on any of my high school guidance counselors' list of recommended occupations. It's like to get to that spot. It must have been like a definite pathway in life, feeling called and moving in those directions. Do you guys, what kinds of initial, I guess, when would you say that you knew that there was some kind of calling to go along those lines and do something out of the ordinary like that? Matt, why don't we start with you this time?
Yeah. So when I was in college, I really felt, I mean, God really changed my life in college, and I was in an environment where talking about doing ministry, talking about living, specifically like living among the unreached, was very normal. There's some parts of that were healthy. There were some parts of that were kind of confusing, and so I would say that I knew that I wanted to live among the unreached, and so I didn't know what that was going to look like, but I knew that I wanted to do something. I felt God stirring my heart for people who had no access to the gospel, and just thinking about, man, what does it mean for what does it mean for people to be born, to live, and to die without ever in their life having access to the gospel? And so God really began stirring my heart for that, and we had an opportunity to move to work with unreached people at what I say it was a good opportunity, or really even just an okay opportunity at a great time in our lives. My wife and I had been married for a year at that point, and it was the right time for us to go. We didn't have kids. We didn't have anything holding us back. And so we moved, and we were naive. We were very idealistic about what it was going to look like. But God used the difficulty of that season and a lot of the successes of that season to point us on the trajectory that we're on now. But really, it was just God stirring my affection for the unreached, and coming to a realization that, man, I've got to be a part of something to reach these people who have no access to the gospel.
So, in a lot of church growth studies, people have figured out that younger, newer churches grow faster and reach more unreached than do older, more established churches. And so I think each style of church or each generation of church has its own advantage and disadvantage. I imagine there's a comparable list that we could build of regarding agencies, ones that are more established and ones that are newer. So what are the advantages you see that your organization has over the more seasoned agencies out there?
I've always kind of compared our agency to like we're more like a ski boat than we are a battleship. And so, a big ship just takes time to turn. It's established. It has rules and regulations, and some of those are really beneficial, because they've learned from experience, and so they don't make these mistakes. But the bigger that ship gets, the more assets that you tend to want to protect of what you've built. And being a light, nimble agency, relatively small and new, some of the same kinds of passions and willingness to take risks that got us into this in the beginning are still very much part of our DNA. And so we are willing to take some risks and do things that are different. And so I think that's probably one of the things, is that I kind of consider us light and fast. So if we want to shift or pivot because of an opportunity that arises, just like this last year, it wasn't on our strategic plan to go to Colorado Springs, but the situation just kind of unfolded in front of us, and we were able to shift resources and jump into that and establish a new location in Colorado Springs. And I don't know how easy that is for another organization to do, with all the qualifications and expectations that people have to go through to jump through that. So to me, I think that's one of those things. Plus, I think another thing is that we don't quite fit the norm and of just an agency that's been established for 100 years. And because of that, I think we're attractive to people who are not looking for that. So especially younger missionaries who are going, they still want people with experience to lead them, but they don't necessarily want the organizational mandate that comes with a 100-year-old organization, that they feel like they'd be trapped immediately and not have the freedom to do what they want to do. And so I feel like that there's both the light and fast by being small and new and maybe a little bit risky and willing to risk. And then also just, I think who we attract changes things a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I would say something really similar to our ability to adjust based on what we're receiving, the information that we're getting, the feedback that we're receiving based on what's working, what's not working. We're able to assess that and pivot really quickly. I know that word became overused during COVID, but really and truly, we're able to assess what's working, what's not working, and in a very short amount of time begin to focus away from or towards those things based on what's happening. And that's a massive advantage, because we're not having to work through kind of the bureaucracy of really large organizations, which obviously have massive advantages. But we're not having to figure out, okay, we have to talk to this person who then has to talk to this person who then has to talk to a big group. Mm-hmm. We're able to make the decision very quickly. And we do that. I mean, that's another thing organizationally we do. We go, we spend time reflecting and discussing what's going well, what's going poorly very regularly. Every semester is how we split up our year. But about 3 times a year, we're looking at what are the things that are working, what are the things that are not working, and looking to do more of the things that are working and less of the things that are not working. So it allows our efficiency to be at a really, really high level for the majority of the time.
I think there's also another uniqueness within our organizations is that sometimes in some circles we might be called sending agencies because we do actually, well, I do, our organization does send people overseas as well. And then there's also missionaries that are hanging out right here in North America. So maybe we could be called a sending and staying agency. I'm not exactly sure how you would label us, but I think there's something really unique about kind of being here in North America that makes things different is that we really recognize that the church is an asset and a tool and filled with people who can go, who don't need a passport, who don't even need a team, honestly, who don't need to be on our staff. And it sounds like that's an introduction too. It's very similar and that they want to equip people to do the same. And so if you think about that from the mission agency's mindset is typically, the typical way was that the agency took people from the church and then sent them and kind of, helped them go. And so we don't really see ourselves as taking people from a church to do that as much as we see us as an asset to the church to go. And so I think it just changes things. And even a church's willingness to invite us in and call us a partner, I don't think they see us as a vendor or someone they're sending people, to us so that we take care of them, but they actually see us as a partner that links arms and works in the same neighborhoods we work in.
Right. So I want to circle back to something that you said, which you referenced that there are younger people coming, and depending on which agency we're talking about, some agencies really struggle. Some only struggle a little, but I think everybody can agree. We all wish to see younger generations getting involved in ministry, in missions as well. Why do you think that they are showing up? Why do you think that they're joining what you guys are doing?
I mean, I think there are two main reasons. I think number one is we have great young people on staff, so they're able to see young people who they relate to, who are in a similar demographic to them. And I will say, it is not easy. It is not easy to hire the best people in that demographic as well. But the reality is we have great young people who have friends who are in that demographic and who are those are the people that they're bringing alongside are those individuals. So I think that's a huge piece of it. I think that also kind of like what Bobby was saying is that the barrier to entry for our ministry is so much lower, because I'm not telling anyone that they have to quit their job and they have to get on a plane and move to the middle of nowhere. I mean, I'm telling people, hey, I want you to stay in your job. I don't want you to stop being a nurse or a graphic designer or a teacher or whatever it is. I want you to stay in your job, and I want to equip you to be a disciple maker, not only in that place, but also in the other hours of your life as well. So that's another huge piece, is that we're not telling people, and I think that goes across the board, but especially for young people who are trying to establish themselves, who are trying to build a life, not saying, hey, you have to put all of that on hold for you to be able to come and be a part of what we're doing. So that's another big piece, I think, as well.
And I think for us, we have young people who desire to go to the nations and have expectations of that, but don't ever feel ready. I think that's part of the younger generation, is they want to be trained, and they want to be trained again, and they want to be trained again, and just be in this continual environment of training. But I also don't think that they want